All right, so in the last video we had taken a look at transforming points using translations. And if you remember what those were, we were just taking a look at shifting points in a certain direction. Now in this video we're going to take a look at reflecting points over different axes and seeing what effect that has on the points. So taking a look at the graph that we had originally, we had f of x equals 2x minus 3, which graphs this line. And you can see points that are already pointed out there. What we're going to do is we're going to look to reflect those first over the x-axis. So we're going to take all of these points, so for instance this point here, and it's going to get reflected over the x-axis. So if you remember, we're going to be taking a look at our x-axis first. That wasn't a great line, but that's okay. We have our x-axis, and we're going to be taking a look at reflecting points over that. So our first point that's here, we have the point 2, 1. We're going to reflect that over the x-axis, and that will become this point here. And if we take a look at another point, so if we take a look at this point, which is 1, negative 1, reflecting that over the x-axis is going to become the point 1, 1. Then if we take a look at 0, negative 3, this point here, we're going to reflect that, and that'll become the point 0, positive 3, which is this point here. Now if we take a look at that pattern continuing, the same type of pattern develops that we've seen. And we're going to see those points being reflected over the x-axis in this way. So if we go ahead and draw a line through those, we can see what that full line is going to develop as in terms of transformations. So looking at this, so there's our reflection. And so now a couple of things to point out about this graph. The first thing that you should notice is that that x value that's right there, so our x-intercept, is exactly the same point in both of these graphs, okay? And thinking about that, that's because if I reflect a point that's at 0, so if this is 0 away from the y-axis or away from the x-axis, then it's going to remain 0. So now if we take a look at some of the points individually and see how those were transformed, so taking a look first at the point 2, 1, so 2, 1, that has become the point 2, negative 1 now, okay? So 2, 1 became 2, negative 1. So 2, 1 becoming 2, negative 1 there. Now if we take a look at another point, and it doesn't really matter which one we take a look at. Let's take a look at the point maybe negative 1, negative 5. So negative 1, negative 5. That point has become the point negative 1, positive 5. And so that's this point right up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So thinking about how these develop and how this pattern continues, if I just take any x value and any y value that's here, we can start to see that the x value is going to stay the same, but the y value is going to be the opposite of what it was. So instead of just having the y that was there, the way we represent the opposite of that is as negative y. And so what this represents the coordinate transformation. So let's go ahead and circle that. That is the coordinate transformation anytime we're taking a look at an x-axis reflection. So let's go ahead and label that. That's going to be an x-axis reflection. Okay, an x-axis reflection. So that just represents we're taking every point that's there, and we're taking the opposite of that y value, and it's going to become a new point, and that new point represents that x-axis reflection. Then another thing that we can take a look at, if we want to take a look at instead an y-axis reflection, so we'll get rid of some of this. We want to take a look at a y-axis reflection, so I'll get rid of some of this over the y-axis, so that we can see it. So if we have the y-axis here, y-axis is right there, and we're going to be taking every point that's on our original line, and we're going to be reflecting it over the y-axis now. So taking a look at the point 2, 1, if I reflect that over the y-axis, that's going to become the point negative 2, 1. So we get this point right here. And let's put that just in a slightly different color so we can see it. Then if I take a look at maybe the point 1, negative 1, that's going to become the point negative 1, negative 1. And we can start to see how this pattern develops. If we take a look at the point here, negative 1, negative 5, that becomes the point positive 1, negative 5. And we get this line. So let's go ahead and graph that. So if we graph that, we'll just go with a nice blue there so that we can see it. And I don't necessarily have to graph the whole thing, but just to point out some things that are good attributes of this. If we take a look at how those points develop out of this, so the point that we started with, 2, 1, so the point 2, 1, has now become the point negative 2, 1. And then if we take a look at another point that's there, maybe we take a look at the point 1, comma, -1, that has now become the point -1, comma, -1. And the same pattern develops. If we take a look at the original point, 1, comma, -5, or -1, comma, -5, then that has now become the point +1, comma, -5. And you can see what the pattern is between those 2 points, those 2 sets of points. Our original x and y values, okay, are very similar, but now what's happening is we're taking the opposite of the x value and we're keeping the y value. The y value stays the same from one of these points to the next, but the x value is the opposite of what it was. And this is what we refer to as a y-axis reflection. Okay, a y-axis reflection. And that's how we can also express that in terms of our coordinate transformations. Okay, in our next video, we'll take a look at stretching some of those points in both the x direction and in the y direction.